Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hello everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Dave Percy, and I'll be hosting today's show. On the hazardous weather graphic, we've got a blizzard warning out for the area from Portage Valley on up to Turnagain Pass. That's out until 6 p.m. Sunday evening here, so a couple more hours. We're blizzard conditions during the day today in those areas, and anywhere from 6 to 12 inches of snow fell with the gusty winds, and visibility's down near zero at times. Wind advisory here for the Alaska Range west of the toe cutoff. That's out until also early this evening, and it will end. That's for those winds gusting 50 to about 50 miles an hour out of the east-southeast. Got to tell you, winter weather advisory that'll end shortly here for the Yukon Delta, and then the winter storm warning, or the blizzard warning for St. Lawrence Island, will continue through the night tonight and end by tomorrow morning for those northeast winds or north winds gusting to 60 miles an hour with 3 to 5 inches of snow, creating near zero visibilities as well. Winter weather advisories here for the eastern Norton Sound coastal areas, and then back across the Seward Peninsula. Over the southeast coast, incoming front, winter storm warning out here for the eastern North Gulf Coast, Yakutat, northern half of the Panhandle. 5 to 7 inches of snow, say, in the Juneau area in the forecast, and winter weather advisories for snow on down over the southern southeast coast. Looking at the area farther to the north, a winter weather advisory out here for the western Arctic coast, and also here for the northwest coast there, Kivalina on up to Point Hope, Cape Lisburne. Snow and blowing snow expected to increase in those areas. And moving on to satellite imagery, you can see all the moisture bringing the snow with it, and the blowing snow that's been going on from St. Lawrence Island. That'll be ending here shortly, diminishing for the Yukon Delta, and milder conditions, seeing some rain now along the Alaska Peninsula. Separate center here developing right around Kodiak earlier, pulling back to the northwest, and that put the squeeze on the atmosphere, kicked those winds up, tighter gradient, 35 to 50 mile per hour gusts here across the Yukon Delta in advance of that, and again even stronger back towards St. Lawrence Island. And the front coming southeast here, right across the Kenai Peninsula and down off the southeast coast. Snow beginning to show up now along the north coast of the Panhandle, falling from areas around Yakutat, near Yakutat, back into Cordova, and again on up into Prince William Sound here and into the Kenai Peninsula. Rolling that through again, just mid and high level clouds spreading north of the Alaska Range here over the northeast interior, but lower conditions here with the snow back to the west. Arctic coast pretty dry today with some areas of clearing. And out over the Aleutians, not a whole lot going on. Some rain showers in the Pribilofs this afternoon, as well as the eastern Aleutians, but colder air coming back down around the backside of that system, bringing snow showers into the far western Aleutians. And that will continue. As you can see, this low center, we're very close to St. Paul Island, pulling back to the west a little bit there. So that'll be circulating the colder air eventually into the central Aleutians over the next 24 hours. On the chart today, there's that low center that developed earlier near Kodiak, pulling northwestward about 3 p.m. Sunday afternoon near Nunivak Island, with the strong winds out in advance of that, bringing the winter weather advisories out to mainly the Yukon Delta today. Blizzard warning, St. Lawrence Island, snow and blowing snow back up in toward the Bering Strait. Not a lot of precipitation along this portion of the front here due to the blocking effect of the terrain, and it also beginning to weaken, but heavier amounts showing up now along the North Gulf Coast. Some rain, Kodiak, showery conditions, rain along the Alaska Peninsula, kind of a weak system lifting northward here. making for a wet day there, but scattering out over the eastern Aleutians. And then the chillier air coming down, bringing the rain and snow showers out over the western and central Aleutians. And the snow band developing here along the North Gulf Coast. And for tonight, that will definitely increase. The whole front pushes in. Look for snow here, fair amount of snow over the northern panhandle with the winter storm warning out for those areas back to Yakutat. Winter weather advisories down to the south with increasing winds and snow, and eventually along the central and south coast, probably changing over to rain later on tonight or after midnight. Rain and snow, North Gulf Coast, areas of snow inland, but it really cuts off here, doesn't get too far inland. And then this portion of the front, as you can see, just dissipates with that main trough rotating back out over the Bering Sea, keeping the blizzard warning going through St. Lawrence Island, the Bering Strait coast through tonight. But a lot less wind here as it was today there for the Pribilof Islands, just scattered showers back down to the Alaska Peninsula. And colder air continues to come southward, snow showers out to the west. And then the next system here building 958 millibar low, which tomorrow will shift northward to just south or near Sand Point there, 961 millibars. More wind and rain with the front coming up Shelikof Strait, Kodiak Island, western North Gulf Coast. Winds on the increase again, southern Cook Inlet, down across Kachemak Bay, and eventually into the Panhandle. Throughout the day, look for the precipitation to gradually switch over to rain, of course, in the south first and along the coast, and eventually working northward there. Warm front making for wet conditions into the Panhandle all the way down in toward the Queen Charlotte Islands. And still gusty winds along the Alaska Range, but that advisory ends this evening there. But the winds won't end altogether. Pretty breezy actually across much of the interior areas. But look for dry conditions now over the western north slope. That area will pull back to the west, so the winter weather advisory will end here along the western Arctic coast and the northwest coast. Much drier here from the Yukon Delta up across the western interior areas. Could see some clearing with the snow and rain on the increase again as this system pulls northward across the Alaska Peninsula into Bristol Bay with the front. And the weaker system, weaker low back out here to the west. Looks like rain and snow coming southeastward there, swinging in toward Adak during the afternoon hours. And the outlook for Tuesday, that next low center travels right up to the Yukon Delta. Snow with that over the west-southwest interior. Mixed conditions across, say, the Kuskokwim Delta. And then rain for Bristol Bay on into Kodiak Island. Becoming dry, a break there for the Alaska Peninsula. Another trough bringing showers, more steadier, heavier showers, or just flat-out rain there for the eastern Aleutians. Mixture of showers back to the west, and more rain sliding up into the southeast coast here. Good south to north flow, so definitely freezing levels, snowfall levels will continue to rise, and a mixture along the North Gulf Coast with rain along the immediate coast there. Not much with the southeast flow, south-southeast flow here. Temperatures warming into the lower 40s across Cook Inlet, possibly the Sitna, Matanuska valleys. Dry north of the Alaska Range with chance of snow up over the Brooks Range. Low temperatures tonight, look down to close to 25 below there for 40 Mile Country. Still below zero over the Yukon Flats, North Slope, and the Arctic coast, but milder here over the Panhandle. Upper teens to mid-20s, 30s, upper 30s, Alaska Peninsula, mid-20s for St. Lawrence Island. And then the highs for tomorrow, looking like this, a shade below zero for the North Slope and the Arctic coast, probably a little colder, more like 10 to 15 below for the highs over the North Slope. And edging above zero here in most areas, still some areas still below zero for the Yukon Flats, but milder temperatures, lower to mid-30s along the Kenai Peninsula, upper 20s the Sitna Valley, lower 40s Kodiak, southern Cook Inlet, say Seldovia, Homer, back across Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula, cooler temperatures, lower to mid-30s out west over the Aleutians, and 30s to lower 40s here for the southeast coast. Quite a warm-up going on there, especially for tomorrow. And then for tomorrow night or Tuesday morning's lows, looking not too low with lower 40s there along the coast and mid to upper 30s over the inland areas. For the southern Alaska, 20s to near 30 for the low temperatures here for south central Alaska. Still below zero again, Northway and Tok up toward the upper Yukon Valley, North Slope and the Arctic coast. Lows a low below zero. Teens and 20s here, Yukon Kuskokwim Delta, upper 30s for Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula. And taking a look at the high temperatures for Tuesday afternoon, looks upper 30s to mid 40s there for the Panhandle, near 40 or into the lower 40s. Some locations, northern Cook Inlet, Matanuska, Susitna Valley, back down toward Kodiak, Kachemak Bay, near 40 for the Alaska Peninsula, and right around 0 or a little above for the Arctic coast, and 30s here over the southwest interior areas.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at flying weather, got some IFR here showing up early tomorrow morning over the Brooks Range area, otherwise marginal. IFR out here, Yukon Delta, coast of Nuvak Island, up to St. Lawrence Island, back to the southwest, marginal on down across the Aleutians. Some VFR there, western Bristol Bay, IFR in the Kilbrook Mountains, and maybe the southern Kuskokwim Range there. IFR North Gulf Coast, all the way back in toward Passage Canal, and lots of IFR now into the Panhandle. For the afternoon forecast, at mostly over toward the border now by the afternoon tomorrow. Still up there at Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, IFR North Gulf Coast into the Coast Range, western Prince William Sound, Southside Kenai Peninsula, eastern slopes, western Alaska Range. Pretty good in the interior here, north and west of the range there. VFR, then some marginal VFR up here over the northeast and the north slope, portions of the Brooks Range. Out to the west, not too bad, retreating, IFR retreating back to the west there, so marginal along the coast here, up into the Bering Strait with IFR hanging tough there across St. Lawrence Island. And from Cape Newenham down to the Alaska Peninsula, up the east side of Kodiak, looks IFR tomorrow into the Kachemak Bay area. And for Tuesday morning, Kilbrook, Auckland Mountain areas, here IFR, Togiak Bay, and less IFR now on the east side of the western Alaska Range. IFR holding though, Prince William Sound, Passage Canal, eastward looks like to Yakutat, and IFR entrenched over the southeast coast, also up there on the eastern Arctic coast. Tuesday afternoon, a little bit of an improvement down here over the Panhandle with some IFR there around Port Alexander and mainly over toward the border, Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, narrower band along the North Gulf Coast here, and still hanging on to IFR on the upslope areas of the Alaska Range and over the southwest. IFR now showing up here on the south upslope areas of the Brooks Range, and this area really retreating back, just mostly marginal VFR now from St. Lawrence Island through the Bering Strait on out to the Aleutians. Not too bad here for the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern central Aleutians. And for passes, Anatuvik and Adigan will be both marginal VFR throughout the day tomorrow. And Lake Clark and Merrill, same pattern we've seen, marginal VFR, lowest conditions, eastern approaches on both passes, same forecast for Rainy. IFR in the eastern entrance, otherwise marginal. And for windy, marginal VFR on the north entrance there into the Tanana Valley, and Isabel marginal VFR. Mentasta looks pretty good, VFR. And for, get out of the way here, Tanita, VFR, and again, possible marginal VFR on the eastern entrance holds. And then for Portage, IFR. Chilkoot and White, same thing. The conditions probably go down pretty rapidly once they start to come down later tonight and into early tomorrow morning with IFR throughout the entire day. Freezing levels here, 2,000 feet, warmer air building down here toward the Queen Charlotte's, edging up into the southern Panhandle, at the surface along the coast, up into the central Bering Sea. And icing, areas of moderate or considerable icing here in these more orange shaded areas along the North Gulf Coast, in the Kenai Peninsula, scattering out back to the southwest there. And jet stream looking, starting out here to the west, pretty strong here. These two bands converge, 140 to 50 knot jet coming across again, splitting here around 155 west or so with a couple of branches. It splits again, one heading into the Panhandle, about 110 knots here, 80 knots coming up into southern Cook Inlet there right across Kodiak Island. And taking a look at the 9,000 foot wind flow chart, pretty good system coming up toward the Alaska Peninsula, and a weaker one out there to the west over the Bering Sea, but good south to north flow here on the eastern side of that system. Southeast, 55 to 60 knots, Kodiak Island, up across the Kenai Peninsula, southern Cook Inlet, and easterlies at about 50 across the Alaska Range here, falling back 25 to 30 over the southwest interior, but 40 knots out of the east across the Aleutian Range. and much lighter up there to the north. And about 35 knots or so across the panhandle, mostly from the south, again at 9,000 feet. 3,000 feet, that comes down. Stronger winds mostly along and off the coast there, 35 to 50 knots. Southeast, 50 to 60. Kenai Peninsula, back down toward Kachemak Bay. Kodiak Island, 35 across Bristol Bay, and 20 to 25 up over the interior. Turbulence, pretty widespread moderate chop across much of southern Alaska.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined again by Eric Stevens of GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And Eric, thanks so much for joining us again tonight.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Thanks, Eric. And we've been talking about the complex gathering of information from satellites, looking down on the surface of the planet, and some of those orbits around the planet work for Alaska, and some of them don't. There's a lot of challenges with those. How can we get better imagery for the poles and specifically for Alaska?
Right. Well, today we're going to talk about a very interesting kind of satellite orbit that has potential to be real helpful for the high latitudes.
Okay.
Especially us here in Alaska. Canadians, Russians, Norwegians will all be interested in this. The satellites are not in orbit yet. Now the future is uncertain, but it's possible, and if this happens, it will be wonderful for Alaska. It's called the highly elliptical orbit.
Oh, that sounds
it's interesting. Yeah. And I think first, to help our discussion, we should get back to some of Kepler's laws and how do satellites work.
Sure.
Kepler's first law, an orbit of a planet around a sun or a weather satellite around the Earth is not necessarily a circle, it's an ellipse.
Okay.
And the highly elliptical orbit takes advantage of this aspect. We're going to put the Earth in one of the ellipse and then stretch one of the foci of the ellipse and then stretch that ellipse out real far to make it highly elliptical.
And the foci is that bend part of the end of the ellipse. If you're going to stretch out a rubber band, that would be the center, kind of the stretchy part.
Yes.
Ends. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then Kepler's second law says that the closer something is to the thing that it's orbiting, the faster it goes.
Okay.
We see this in the solar system, that Mercury flies around the sun real fast. Jupiter, much slower. Jupiter's further away, it's slower. Mercury's closer in, it's faster. This happens with weather satellites too. Even satellites like the International Space Station, it's pretty close to the Earth. It goes around the Earth in only 90 minutes. That thing is moving. It's only 250 miles away. So how can we take advantage of these two aspects of Kepler's laws of motion to get better weather surveillance of Alaska? And this highly elliptical orbit is going to be the approach. So we have with us today our friendly planet Earth and our simulated satellite, the lid off of this salt shaker
like
here.
Sputnik there. Yeah.
There it is. It's shiny, it's metal, it's space worthy. And what we want to be able to do is, could you have a satellite hover over the top of the world, up over Alaska? You can't really do that. Geostationary satellites have to be over the equator.
Okay.
So how could we almost solve this? And this is the tricky part. Maybe should we tilt the Earth over?
Focus on the pole. That's what we're trying to accomplish here, right?
So here we have the northern side of the planet, and we're going to trace out the orbit of a satellite with this salt shaker lid here. Now imagine a highly elliptical orbit. So let's put the Earth in one of the foci of the ellipse, and we'll have an imaginary foci out here. So the satellite will not go in a circle around the Earth, but will be in this long strung out ellipse. So the satellite will go...
Kind of like a racetrack.
Yes, there you go, like a racetrack. So it's an oval elliptical shape like that. And notice now that when the satellite's over here, we've got a nice view of the northern hemisphere around. There's Alaska, Russia, Canada, Greenland, all there. So that's the ellipse aspect of an orbit, Kepler's first law. The second law saying that when you're further away as a satellite, you go slower. And this we can take real advantage of. Because the way this orbit works, when the satellite goes over Antarctica here, it's going to be close to the Earth. It's going to be moving, whoosh, goes on by. And then as it comes out here, it will slow down. This increases what is known as the dwell time. The satellite will just hang here looking for hours at Alaska and the high Arctic. And then eventually it will come around and it will accelerate and whiz around the South Pole and then come back and hang here for a while because it's further away from the planet. It goes slower.
Yeah.
It has to. That's the laws of motion, and such like that repeating.
Wow.
Now the real important way to make this work is you have to have two satellites, so that while one is whipping around the pole, you've got the other one out here, and they work as a team. You could then get a series of images of Alaska that can be almost from a constant frame of reference,
Right.
and you can loop them together to make movies. You can take a picture every 10 minutes, say, of Alaska, and then loop it, playing it at several frames a second. You could see the clouds whiz on by. You know, the Weather Channel, weather broadcasters in the lower 48 especially can show these movie loops from the geostationary satellites. In Alaska, we've never really been able to do that very well, especially in the higher, most northern parts of the state, because those geostationary satellites are over the equator. It's not a good view. And this highly elliptical orbit whipping around the South Pole and then dwelling up here would be a way for us to get that constant frame of reference and do really good weather surveillance over the Arctic, seeing where those storms are, where they're going. Nothing quite like a movie loop of the weather in time to really illustrate what's important, what's going on.
And compared to what we have right now, we just have small windows or snapshots of what's going on with the polar orbiters. We don't have that long range view that's looking top down to give us that complete motion picture that helps us understand so much of the atmosphere at this
There's
point.
so many different kinds of satellites. Each has their advantage. Each is important, and the highly elliptical orbit satellite will also fit into that scheme. It's a nifty idea to solve an Alaskan challenge.
That's fantastic. Well, that sounds really exciting. Again, kind of a satellite dream of the future to come. Okay, very good. Thanks for joining us today, Eric. We really appreciate the information. And if you'd like to learn more about what Eric does at Dehne, at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, we invite you to visit the web address that you see on your screen there. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis, pinching off or closing off here through the Bering Strait now, and no more sea ice free area there in the Chukchi, and expanding slowly westward here south of the strait along the west coast all the way down to Kuskokwim Bay, and that pattern is expected to continue for the next several days. Marine forecast, south winds 30 knots, 15-foot seas on the south coast, and then gales up here to the north, 35-knot plus winds with 15-plus foot seas. Southeast 20, gust 35 for Lynn Canal, and southeast 30 for Stevens Passage. Clarence Strait, southeast 25, 8-foot seas, small craft advisories there. That continues into Tuesday with the small crafts, also on the south coast, 17 to 19-foot seas, and a good stiff 30-knot breeze there on the north coast with seas at 20 feet. Prince William Sound, east 45 knots, 10-foot seas tomorrow, east at 50, storm warning there for the North Gulf Coast. West side 45 in across the Barrens, back up to 50 knots. Out of the east, 21-foot seas for Kachemak Bay. Southern Cook Inlet, northeast 45 knots with 16-foot seas, and we got gales out for northern Cook Inlet with seas up to 12 feet. And then for Tuesday, swinging around to the southeast, 30 knots and 9-foot seas, 40-knot winds south of the Forelands, all the way down across Kachemak Bay. South 40 for the Barrens, coming down to south-southeast 35 for the North Gulf Coast, and still a gale there for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, east 45 on the eastern zone there. Shelikof Strait, northeast 45. Sitkinak to Castle Cape, east 40, and then 40-knot northeasterlies down to Cape Sarachev. Gales on the Bering Sea side. Gales out for Bristol Bay. And for Tuesday, south at 30 knots there for Bristol Bay. Southwesterlies 30, 35 knots with the gales on the Pacific side of the peninsula. And then gale warnings out Kodiak Island and Shelikof Strait. Out in the Aleutians, west-northwest, 30 knots there for those western zones. Central areas, Adak and Atka, west 25, 9 to 16-foot seas. And for the Fox Islands, west-northwest, 20 to 30 knots, with seas running 8 to 14 feet. And then for Tuesday, west to west-southwest, 25 to 30 knots there for the Fox Islands. Westerlies at 25 to 30, all the way out to Shumia and Attu. Southwest coast, gales tomorrow, south of Nunivak Island, 35 knots, just 10 knots though for the Pribilof. Small craft advisories here, St. Matthew Island, all the way up to the Bering Strait. And then for Tuesday, northeast 30 knots, 25 knots for Norton Sound, and 30-knot winds over the northern Bering Sea, south of Nunivak Island, northerlies at 25, and the Pribilofs northwest 15, 7-foot seas. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow. Brisk wind advisories there, 25 knots, falling back to about 20 on the central coast. Then gales here on the west side from Point Lay down to Cape Thompson. And then easterlies at 25 with 5-foot seas there for the Chukchi Sea. And then north 25 on Tuesday. And then Cape Thompson, Cape Beaufort, 30 knots there. Could be some higher gusts. Otherwise, brisk wind advisories there for the western and central coast, east side, and then into the gales there for that far eastern zone toward demarcation point, east 35 knots. For tonight, winter storm warning out over the northern panhandle as that front. This portion really falls apart. That low center pulls back to the northwest, keeps a blizzard warning going there across St. Lawrence Island through the night tonight with 60-mile-an-hour winds and reduced visibilities. Winter storm warnings with pretty good shot of snow coming into the panhandle overnight tonight and into tomorrow. Could be as much as a foot over towards Hyder and Stewart, and 5 to 7 inches in the Juneau area. Eventually starting to change over to rain central south coast late. And then for the day tomorrow, gradual slow progression of snow to rain going on there with the warmer air surging northward, and another warm front here approaching the coast. Wet and windy for the North Gulf Coast. Next storm coming northward. Pretty good winds there. Kodiak Island again back into the strong winds in advance of the front, but not much precipitation penetrating inland at all. Just variable clouds, breezy conditions over the interior, milder temperatures, and unsettled out over the Bering Sea. And that stays unsettled out there for the next, or at least through Tuesday, as this low center tracks up, sits right over the Yukon Delta. Snow in this area, band extending northeast, dry over the eastern interior north of the Alaska Range. And a weaker system brings more rain into the North Gulf Coast, a mixture inland, and more rain eventually shows up over the panhandle later on in the day with a gradual increase in the winds. Otherwise, not too bad back Kodiak Island, kind of showery and cloudy with some precipitation. Thanks for joining us.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.